Lawrence threw the papers on the desk. "Sign it and get out, Julian. You're done here." He was smirking, thinking he just won the board. He had no idea he was signing his own corporate execution. The conference room on the 42nd floor of the glass tower was dead silent, save for the hum of the air conditioning and the rhythmic tapping of Lawrence Vance's gold signet ring against the mahogany table. He tossed the thick manila folder across the table, letting it slide until it bumped against my coffee mug. "Sign the termination agreement, Julian, and make this easy on yourself," Lawrence said, a thin, patronizing smirk stretching across his face. "Your services as chief legal officer are no longer required. The board has voted to restructure, and we are moving in a different direction. You have 10 minutes to clear your office." I looked down at the documents, then back at Lawrence's smug expression. He thought this was the final move in his hostile takeover. He had no idea that by forcing me out, he had just pulled the pin on his own corporate grenade. The road to this glass office began 16 years ago, back in the winter of 2010. I was a 32-year-old corporate attorney, tired of the mindless grind at big law firms, when Lewis Miller, the brilliant and eccentric founder of Miller Engineering Group, hired me as the company's first in-house general counsel. At the time, Miller Engineering was a mid-sized firm generating around $15 million in annual revenue, operating out of a cramped, oil-scented facility in Ohio. Lewis and his team of aerospace engineers had developed a revolutionary manufacturing process for lightweight composite alloys used in commercial aircraft turbines. They were geniuses at metallurgy, but they were children when it came to corporate law. Competitors tried to copy their patents, suppliers tried to squeeze their margins, and venture capitalists tried to dilute their ownership. My job was to build a legal fortress around Lewis's life work. For the first 4 years, I drafted contracts, registered intellectual property, and structured joint ventures. My defining moment came in the summer of 2014. A multi-billion-dollar defense contractor filed a massive patent infringement lawsuit against us, attempting to tie us up in litigation until we ran out of cash and were forced to sell our composite alloy patents for pennies. It was a classic corporate squeeze. I spent 6 months living on black coffee and lukewarm takeout, dissecting their patent filings, tracing their prior art, and discovering that the contractor's lead scientist had actually attended a seminar hosted by Lewis 3 years prior, where Lewis had presented the early stages of our technology. I found the original attendance log, the signed non-disclosure agreement, and the scientist's handwritten notes. I didn't just defend the lawsuit. I launched a countersuit for patent fraud and trade secret misappropriation. The giant contractor settled, paying Miller Engineering a $15 million cash settlement and signing a lifetime licensing agreement. Lewis was ecstatic. He knew that without my legal defense, his company would have been liquidated. In August of 2014, Lewis called me into his office. He handed me a stock certificate representing a 1% equity stake in the company. But it wasn't ordinary common stock. "Julian, you saved this company," Lewis had said, his voice quiet but firm. "My daughter Clara will run the operations when I'm gone, but she's an engineer, not a corporate shark. I need you to protect this place from the wolves. I'm issuing you a single Class B share. It has no dividend rights, but it carries a golden veto over any sale, transfer, or licensing of our core intellectual property to any external entity. If anyone ever tries to strip this company of its soul, you can stop them." I drafted the corporate charter amendment myself, registering it under Delaware General Corporation law. The Class B golden share was coded into the very DNA of Miller Engineering Group. It required unanimous consent from all Class B shareholders for any transaction involving the sale or exclusive licensing of our proprietary patents. To ensure the board couldn't simply vote to cancel the share, I inserted a crucial safeguard, Section 14 Ses, of the shareholder agreement. If the Class B holder was terminated without cause, the veto power remained active, and any pending asset transfers would be automatically frozen until an independent audit cleared the transaction of any shareholder oppression. The charter was filed, signed, and locked in the corporate safe. Years passed, and the company grew. By 2022, Miller Engineering Group was generating $45 million in annual recurring revenue with a healthy 15% net profit margin. Lewis's daughter, Clara Miller, a brilliant operations manager now 42 years old, was successfully running the day-to-day manufacturing plant, while I managed the corporate administration. But in late 2023, Lewis passed away at the age of 67. His death left a void, and it also left his 51% controlling interest in the company split between Clara and a trust managed by a local bank. That was when the wolves arrived. Apex Equity Partners, a private equity firm managed by Lawrence Vance, saw a vulnerable target. Lawrence was a 50-year-old financial engineer who didn't care about aerospace composite alloys. He cared about arbitrage. He approached the bank trustee and offered $93.6 million for the 52% controlling stake of the company, representing an M&A multiple of 4 times the company's annual revenue. Clara begged the trustee not to sell, but the bank, focused solely on short-term fiduciary returns, accepted the offer. In early 2025, Apex Equity Partners completed the leveraged buyout, using $65 million in high-interest debt secured against Miller Engineering's own physical assets and $28.6 million in their own capital. The day Lawrence Vance walked into our headquarters, the atmosphere changed. He replaced the board with his own junior associates, cut the research and development budget by 40%, and began looking for ways to extract quick cash. Within 6 months, I noticed Lawrence and his financial analysts spending an unusual amount of time reviewing our patent portfolio. They were asking detailed questions about the valuation of our aerospace composite alloys. As the chief legal officer, I had to sign off on any internal transfer documents. In October of 2025, my assistant flagged a draft agreement on the corporate server. Lawrence had set up a shell entity in the Cayman Islands called Vanguard Aerospace Holdings. The draft agreement proposed transferring all of Miller Engineering Group's core patents to Vanguard for a nominal fee of $5 million. Once the patents were transferred, Vanguard would license them to a major global defense conglomerate for a staggering $450 million. It was a classic asset stripping scheme. The cash would flow directly to Apex's offshore account, leaving Miller Engineering Group as an empty shell with $65 million in LBO debt, no proprietary technology, and no future. Clara's remaining shares would be worthless, and our 200 manufacturing workers would be out of a job within a year. I walked into Lawrence's office and laid the draft agreement on his desk. "I can't sign off on this, Lawrence," I said calmly. "This transfer violates Delaware law regarding fiduciary duties to minority shareholders. It's a fraudulent conveyance designed to strip the company's assets." Lawrence didn't even look up from his tablet. He just chuckled. "You don't need to sign off on it, Julian. We own 52% of the company. We control the board. We do what we want." "You own 52% of the equity," I replied. "But you don't own the Class B share. And under the corporate charter, you can't transfer these patents without my signature." Lawrence's eyes narrowed. He realized that I wasn't just a compliance officer. I was a wall he couldn't climb. "We'll see about that," he muttered. 2 weeks later, I was called into the 42nd floor conference room, where Lawrence was waiting with my termination papers. He thought that by removing me from my job, he would remove my veto. He was about to find out how wrong he was. Lawrence Vance leaned back in his leather chair, the smirk on his face growing wider as he watched me scan the termination papers. "I'm offering you a standard severance package, Julian," he said, sliding a second document across the table. 12 months of your base salary, which comes out to $240,000, plus health insurance coverage for the same period. In exchange, you sign this standard release of claims. You walk away, you enjoy an early retirement, and you don't make a pest of yourself. It's a generous offer for someone who has spent the last year dragging his feet on our strategic initiatives. I looked at the release of claims. It was a masterpiece of corporate trap-laying. Hidden in paragraph 8, section B, was a sweeping clause stating that the signatory relinquished all rights, claims, and ownership interests in any class of stock, including any special voting or veto rights, in exchange for the cash payout. If I signed that paper, my Class B golden share would be legally extinguished, and the veto power Lewis Miller had entrusted to me to protect his company would vanish instantly. You've been planning this for a while, haven't you, Lawrence? I asked, keeping my voice flat and even. It's just business, Julian, Lawrence replied, checking his platinum watch. The aerospace market is shifting. We need to unlock the value of those patents. We can't have an old-school lawyer hiding behind outdated bylaws, blocking a $450 million transaction. Apex has $65 million in leveraged buyout debt on our books that matures at the end of next September. We need this Cayman deal to go through. So, sign the papers, take the $240,000 and leave. If you don't, I'll terminate you for cause, cite insubordination for refusing to execute board-approved contracts, withhold your severance, and tie you up in court until you're bankrupt. I stood up, leaving the unsigned documents and the severance check on the polished mahogany table. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't show anger. I won't be signing this, Lawrence, and I won't be taking the check. Understood. Lawrence chuckled, a dry, grating sound. You're making a huge mistake, Julian. If you walk out of here without signing, you leave with nothing. The board will vote to invalidate your Class B share by 5 o'clock today. You have no cards left to play. We will see what the courts have to say about that, I said, picking up my briefcase. I walked out of the conference room and down the quiet hallway to my office. My assistant, a loyal woman named Sarah Lynn, who had worked with me for 9 years, was waiting. She had already packed my personal belongings into 2 cardboard boxes, sensing the storm that had been brewing since Apex took over. He did it? She asked quietly, her eyes filled with concern. He did, I replied, taking the boxes. Don't worry, Sarah. This is exactly what we prepared for. Keep your head down, do your job, and watch your email. As I walked toward the elevator, I ran into Clara Miller. Her face was pale, and she was holding a stack of budget spreadsheets. Julian, I just heard. Lawrence called an emergency board meeting. They are going to vote to strip the patents and bypass the veto. What are we going to do? I paused, looking at the daughter of the man who had built this company. Clara, do you trust me? Of course I do, she said. Then let Lawrence think he won. Don't fight him in the board meeting today. Let him vote, let him pass his resolutions, and let him try to execute the contract with Vanguard Aerospace in the Caymans. The moment he signs that paper, he walks into the trap. What trap? She whispered. Just go back to your office and act defeated. I'll contact you tonight. I stepped into the elevator, the doors sliding shut on the 42nd floor. When I reached the lobby, I walked out into the crisp autumn air and drove straight to my house in the suburbs. I didn't feel defeated. I felt a cold, focused adrenaline. For the past 12 months, as Lawrence had been plotting to strip the company, I had been preparing my counter-strategy. I knew that Delaware courts take corporate charters and shareholder agreements extremely seriously, especially when a private equity firm attempts to squeeze out minority shareholders and engage in self-dealing. I went up to my home study, opened my personal laptop, and established a secure connection to my private server. The first thing I did was download the certified copy of the Miller Engineering Group corporate charter, specifically the 2014 amendment that Lewis Miller and I had filed. I then opened an encrypted document containing the contact information for Harvey Cross, a senior partner at one of the top corporate litigation firms in Wilmington, Delaware. Harvey and I had gone to law school together, and he was an absolute titan when it came to shareholder disputes. I called Harvey and laid out the facts. Lawrence Vance just terminated me without cause, I explained. He did it to bypass my Class B golden share veto on a $450 million patent transfer to a Cayman shell company. He's holding an emergency board meeting right now to ratify the deal. Harvey let out a low whistle over the line. He's executing a classic asset strip while under the pressure of LBO debt. But he made a fatal error by firing you. Did he try to get you to sign a release? He offered $240,000. I left it on the table. Brilliant, Harvey said. If you had signed that, we'd be dead in the water. Since you didn't, Section 14C of the shareholder agreement is fully active. The moment he attempts to register that patent transfer, we file for an emergency temporary restraining order in the Delaware Court of Chancery. We'll cite breach of fiduciary duty, shareholder oppression, and fraudulent conveyance under the Uniform Voidable Transactions Act. I can have the filing ready by midnight. Do it, I said. I want the injunction served on Lawrence and his lenders the moment the market opens tomorrow morning. After hanging up, I spent the next 4 hours compiling evidence, emails from Lawrence's analysts detailing the Cayman transfer, financial statements showing the company's $45 million revenue and the $65 million LBO debt structure, and the original corporate charter documents. By 9 o'clock that evening, Lawrence Vance had no idea that while he was celebrating his takeover victory with expensive scotch, the legal machinery that would crush his career had already been set in motion. At exactly 8:30 on Tuesday morning, the Delaware Court of Chancery docket updated. Harvey Cross had filed a 92-page complaint, Julian Cole v. Apex Equity Partners LLC and Miller Engineering Group, Inc., along with an emergency motion for a temporary restraining order. The filing didn't just target the company. It named Lawrence Vance individually for breach of fiduciary duty and named Vanguard Aerospace Holdings in the Cayman Islands as a co-conspirator in a fraudulent asset transfer. By 9:15, Lawrence Vance was in the middle of a celebratory video call with the executives of the defense conglomerate, ready to walk them through the signing of the patent transfer. He was expecting the initial wire of $50 million to hit the escrow account by noon. That money was critical. Apex's $65 million bridge loan from Bridgestone Capital was incurring interests at a staggering 12%, and the bank had already warned him that any delay in securing the patent sale would trigger a credit review. The celebration ended abruptly when his administrative assistant burst into the conference room, her face pale, holding a thick stack of papers. Behind her was a licensed process server who calmly laid the Court of Chancery's summons and the signed temporary restraining order directly in front of Lawrence. "What is the meaning of this?" Lawrence barked, staring at the process server. "You've been served, Mr. Vance," the server said flatly. "There is an immediate injunction signed by the Chancellor. All transfers of intellectual property, including patents, trade secrets, and manufacturing designs owned by Miller Engineering Group, are frozen pending a full hearing in 10 days. Lawrence slammed his fist on the table, disconnecting the video call. "Get me Julian Cole on the phone, now!" My phone rang while I was sitting on my back porch, drinking a fresh cup of coffee and watching the morning fog lift. I let it ring 3 times before picking up. "Julian Cole, you arrogant son of a bitch," Lawrence hissed, his voice trembling with rage. "You think you can play games with me? I am going to sue you for tortious interference. I will drag your name through every legal publication in the country. You will never work as a corporate lawyer again. You are violating your duty to the company by blocking a profitable transaction." "Actually, Lawrence, I'm protecting the company," I replied, keeping my voice cool and professional. "Under Delaware General Corporation Law, specifically Section 251, any material asset sale that strips a corporation of its operating capacity requires the approval of all classes of stock. Furthermore, under the corporate charter of Miller Engineering Group, my Class B golden share has absolute veto power over any transfer of intellectual property exceeding $10 million. We voted to invalidate that share yesterday," Lawrence shouted. "The board approved a resolution stripping you of your voting rights. You held a board meeting where you voted to strip my Class B rights after you terminated me without cause," I said. "If you had read the shareholder agreement I drafted in 2014, specifically Section 14A, you would know that if the Class B holder is terminated without cause, the veto power remains active, and any pending asset transfers are frozen until an independent audit is completed. Your board resolution yesterday was a flagrant violation of the charter. By voting to strip my rights to facilitate a self-dealing transfer to your own offshore shell company, you committed a breach of the duty of loyalty. That's a non-exculpable violation under Delaware law." There was a long silence on the line. I could hear Lawrence's heavy, erratic breathing. "We have a $65 million leverage loan with Bridgestone Capital," he said, his voice dropping to a low, menacing whisper. "If this deal is delayed, the bank will freeze our operating lines. You are going to put 200 people out of work, Julian. Is that what you want?" "No, Lawrence, that's what you did when you loaded a healthy $45 million engineering company with $65 million in debt just to line your own pockets." I've already served a copy of the temporary restraining order to Bridgestone Capital's general counsel. They now know that the collateral they used to secure your LBO, our patent portfolio, is currently frozen in litigation. Under Section 9 of your credit agreement, a material litigation freeze on core collateral constitutes an immediate event of technical default. You didn't, Lawrence gasped. I did, I said. Bridgestone Capital is probably calling your office right now. I suggest you take their call. Good luck, Lawrence. I hung up the phone and took another sip of my coffee. Within an hour, the panic had set in at Apex Equity Partners. Bridgestone Capital's credit risk department had indeed flagged the Delaware filing. The investment bank was not run by fools. They realized that if Julian Cole's lawsuit succeeded, the composite alloy patents would remain with Miller Engineering Group, and Apex would have no way to generate the $450 million from the Cayman deal to repay the $65 million loan. Worse for Lawrence, the LBO loan agreement had a strict clause. A technical default that remained uncured for 15 days allowed the lender to accelerate the debt and execute their security interest over the 52% controlling shares of Miller Engineering Group that Apex had pledged as collateral. Lawrence Vance had thought he was playing a simple game of corporate bullying. He had assumed that an in-house lawyer would scare easily when faced with termination and a loss of livelihood. He had failed to realize that I had spent 16 years building the legal foundation of this company, and I knew every single brick, every single crack, and every single trapdoor. He was trapped in a room of his own making, and the ceiling was beginning to come down. By Thursday, the tension inside Miller Engineering Group's Ohio manufacturing facility was thick enough to cut with a knife. Lawrence Vance had flown down from the New York offices, accompanied by 3 tech forensic analysts. He was desperate. The temporary restraining order had blocked the legal patent transfer, but Lawrence was trying to find a back door. If he could secretly copy the proprietary manufacturing software and deliver it to Vanguard Aerospace in the Caymans, he could present the defense conglomerate with a fait accompli and secure the $450 million payout. Arguing the legal details could be sorted out later, the key to the entire operation was what the engineers called the 145K code. It was a highly proprietary codebase containing exactly 145,000 lines of custom-written, low-level C++ code that controlled the high-precision thermal cooling cycles in our specialized furnaces. Without the 145K code, the composite alloy patents were nothing more than theoretical descriptions on paper. The code was what made the physical production of the lightweight aerospace turbines possible. If you ran the furnaces without it, the alloys would crack under stress, rendering the turbine blades useless. Lawrence marched into the engineering lab, flanked by his analysts. I need the complete source code for the thermal cooling cycles downloaded onto this drive immediately, he commanded. Throwing a secure USB drive onto the lead engineer's desk, Clara Miller stepped in front of the engineer. We can't do that, Lawrence. That codebase is the intellectual property of Miller Engineering Group. Under the court injunction, you are prohibited from transferring, copying, or exporting any proprietary technology. I am the chairman of the board, Clara, Lawrence shouted, his face turning red. I represent 52% of the shareholders. This code belongs to the company, and I control the company. If you refuse to comply, I will fire every single engineer in this room for cause, and we will hire contractors who will do what they are told. The lead engineer, a veteran metallurgist who had worked with Lewis Miller for 20 years, shook his head. Even if we wanted to, Mr. Vance, we can't download it for you. The repository is encrypted under a dual-key security protocol. Lawrence's eyes bulged. What do you mean, dual key? When Julian Cole and Lewis set up the network architecture in 2014, they wanted to ensure that no single person could ever leak or steal the core technology, Clara explained calmly. The 145K code is split encrypted. To access the primary repository or export the code, the system requires a physical 2-factor hardware token authentication from 2 separate individuals, the chief operating officer and the chief legal officer. I have my token, but the second token is held by Julian, and since you fired him, he isn't here to insert it. Lawrence looked at his forensic analysts. Bypass it. Hack the server, rebuild the partition, do whatever you have to do. The lead analyst adjusted his glasses and looked down at his laptop. We've been looking at the structure for the last 3 hours, Mr. Vance. It's a 20,000-bit localized encryption shield. The server is physically air-gapped from the main internet. If we try to brute force the encryption or physically remove the hard drives, the BIOS is programmed to execute a self-destruct wipe of the solid-state drives. Without the 2 hardware keys, the code is completely inaccessible. Lawrence realized he was staring at a digital vault he could not crack. He stormed out of the lab, slamming the door behind him. The next morning, the clock was ticking louder. The 15-day cure period for the technical default with Bridgestone Capital was halfway through. The bank had already sent an official notice of intent to foreclose. If Lawrence didn't clear the court injunction and deliver the patents and the 145K code to Vanguard Aerospace within 7 days, Bridgestone Capital would seize Apex's 52% controlling stake. Not only would Apex lose their entire $28.6 million equity investment, but Lawrence would also face personal liability lawsuits from his own limited partners for gross negligence. At 3 o'clock on Friday afternoon, my phone rang again. It was Lawrence. This time his voice was different. The rage was gone, replaced by a hollow, desperate exhaustion. "Julian," he said, clearing his throat, "we need to talk. Let's meet at the downtown diner near the office. Just you and me. Let's figure out a solution that works for everyone." "I'll meet you, Lawrence," I said, "but the terms will be mine." An hour later, I walked into the quiet booth at the back of the diner. Lawrence was already there, staring into a cup of lukewarm black coffee. The expensive dark navy suit he wore looked slightly rumpled, and the sharp, confident posture he had held in the boardroom was completely gone. "I'll give you $5 million, Julian," Lawrence said immediately, not even waiting for me to sit down. "We'll write it up as a consulting agreement. $5 million cash, paid out over 2 years if you sign the release, withdraw the Delaware lawsuit, and bring your hardware token to the plant to unlock the 145K code. That's more than you would make in 20 years of working here." I sat down, placing my briefcase on the bench beside me. "No, Lawrence." $10 million, he pressed, leaning forward, his eyes bloodshot. $10 million, that's my final offer. You can retire anywhere in the world. You won. You proved your point. Now let us do the deal." "You don't understand, Lawrence," I said quietly, looking him straight in the eye. "I don't care about your $10 million. I built this company with Lewis Miller. I know the families of the 200 people who work in the manufacturing facility. I promised Lewis on his deathbed that I would protect his legacy and his daughter. I am not going to let you strip this company, put our people out of work, and walk away with $450 million in the Caymans." "Then what do you want?" Lawrence whispered, his hands trembling. "If we default on the Bridgestone loan, the bank will foreclose. The company will be tied up in bankruptcy court. Nobody wins." "That's where you're wrong," I said, opening my briefcase and sliding a single-page document across the table. "This is a stock purchase agreement. Apex Equity Partners will transfer its entire 52% controlling interest in Miller Engineering Group to a new syndicate formed by Clara Miller, myself, and the original engineering staff." Lawrence stared at the paper. "At what price?" $18 million, I said. "Paid in cash, $18 million. Lawrence gasped. "We paid $93.6 million for those shares. You are asking me to take a $75 million loss. That's insane. I'll never sign this." "Then don't," I replied calmly, closing my briefcase. "In 7 days, Bridgestone Capital will foreclose on your shares anyway, and you will get exactly zero. Plus, my lawsuit in Delaware will proceed. I will seek personal damages against you for breach of the duty of loyalty, and I will win. You will be personally bankrupt, Lawrence. $18 million is enough for you to pay off your limited partner's immediate capital calls and avoid prison. It's the only lifeline you are going to get." I stood up and looked down at him. "You have 48 hours to decide. After that, the price goes down to $10 million. I turned and walked out of the diner, leaving him alone in the booth. On Monday morning at 9 o'clock, the 48th hour of my ultimatum expired. Lawrence Vance's signature arrived via secure electronic document transfer. There was no grand ceremony, no final boardroom confrontation. Lawrence had spent the weekend in conference calls with his partners and legal advisors, and they had all reached the same conclusion: sign the agreement or face complete financial ruin. Apex Equity Partners transferred their 52% controlling interest in Miller Engineering Group to our newly formed syndicate, the Miller Heritage Alliance, for exactly $18 million. To secure the $18 million in cash, Clara and I had worked through the weekend with the Ohio Heritage Fund, a regional private equity firm that specialized in long-term, non-hostile investments in manufacturing companies. Unlike Apex, the Ohio Heritage Fund didn't want to strip our patents or lay off our workers. They valued the stable, $45 million annual revenue and the 15% net profit margins. They provided the $18 million as a low-interest equity loan in exchange for a 20% non-voting stake in the reorganized company. Clara and I, along with the key engineering staff, held the remaining 80% of the voting shares. We had successfully bought back our company for less than a fifth of what Apex had paid for it a year prior. The moment the transaction cleared, Lawrence Vance and his junior associates were officially removed from the board of directors. Lawrence's nameplate was unscrewed from the door, and his personal items were sent to his New York residence in cheap cardboard boxes. But his troubles were far from over. With the transaction finalized, I filed a motion to dismiss our lawsuit in the Delaware Court of Chancery, but the documents we had entered into the public record had already caught the attention of federal regulators. The SEC launched an official investigation into Apex Equity Partners and Lawrence Vance for violation of SEC Rule 10b-5 regarding manipulative and deceptive corporate devices. The evidence of self-dealing, attempting to transfer patents to an offshore Cayman shell company to defraud minority shareholders, was undeniable. Within 6 months, Lawrence was barred from managing private equity funds and was forced to pay millions in civil penalties, completely destroying his career in finance. On Tuesday morning, Clara and I walked into the engineering facility together. The atmosphere in the plant was electric. The 200 manufacturing workers, who had been fearing layoffs for months, stood by their machines and cheered as we entered. We walked into the engineering lab where the team was waiting. I pulled the physical Class B hardware token from my pocket. It was a simple, rugged USB drive with a hardware encryption chip. Clara pulled her matching token from her lanyard. Together we inserted them into the air-gapped server console. The green status light blinked, the drive whirred, and the system unlocked. The 145K code, our proprietary 145,000 lines of C++ code, was fully restored to the active production network. The specialized furnaces began their heating cycles, the cooling algorithms executed flawlessly, and the first batch of aerospace composite alloy turbine blades since the takeover began their production run. 3 weeks later, as the new chairman of the board and chief legal officer, I sat down with the representatives of the global defense conglomerate. This time, we weren't negotiating a transfer of ownership to a Cayman shell company. We structured a legitimate, non-exclusive licensing agreement for our composite alloy patents. The defense conglomerate agreed to pay Miller Engineering Group a $120 million upfront licensing fee, plus a 7% royalty on every turbine blade manufactured using our technology over the next 10 years. The licensing deal brought a massive cash injection into the company, allowing us to completely pay off the Ohio Heritage Fund loan and invest $20 million into a new research and development wing. The company Lewis Miller built was not only saved, but it was also stronger than it had ever been. On a quiet evening in late November, I stood on the balcony of the executive office, looking down at the manufacturing floor below. The machines were humming, the forklifts were moving, and the workers were busy fabricating the components that would fly on commercial aircraft all over the world. Clara walked out, handing me a glass of whiskey. "We did it, Julian," she said, looking out at the factory. "My dad would have been proud. He knew what he was doing when he issued that Class B share." "Clara," I replied, clinking my glass against hers. "He knew that the value of this company wasn't just in the physical assets or the bank balance. It was in the minds of the people who created this technology and the code that made it work." I took a sip of the whiskey, feeling the warmth spread through my chest. Lawrence Vance had believed that the corporate world belonged to the ruthless, that contracts could be rewritten by the powerful, and that an in-house lawyer could be swept aside like dust. But he had forgotten that a company's legal foundation, when built with foresight and integrity, is an unyielding fortress. We hadn't just defeated a hostile takeover, we had preserved a legacy, and we had done it by using the very rules they thought they could ignore.